Welcome to a special edition of News from the Roots. Today is Saturday, May 15th. No, today is Saturday, May 12th.
May 12th.
And I have a special guest, John DeVille, who is a teacher at Franklin High School. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Avram.
Yeah. So we want to talk a little bit this morning about what's happening with the teachers in not only in North Carolina, but what's happening nationwide for underpaid teachers around the country. And is North Carolina about to join this uprising?
Well, the first thing I want to challenge, and I know you don't mean anything malicious by it, but certainly that there are opponents of public education who would, is that when you look at the people who are marching in West Virginia, and Oklahoma, and Arizona, Kentucky, and now Colorado, and now this coming Wednesday, North Carolina, I would say for the most part, we are not marching for teacher pay. Certainly in North Carolina, our pay could be better. We're around 39th, 42nd, depending on how you want to crunch the numbers. We could certainly be better. The pay that's the worst in North Carolina is our principals. We just now got above Puerto Rico and Guam, so we went from being either 51st or 52nd to only 50th now. But what we're out there, I think most teachers are out there fighting for, why we will be marching on Halifax Mall this coming Wednesday, is because of the lack of resources. Our textbook funding is down 45% or so from 2008, 2009 levels, and even with coming up to a whole 50% or so of what it was 9, 10, 11 years ago, we still had several years there of exceptional deficits in textbook funding, which we are no longer, that gap, that chasm still exists. We have a lot of teachers in North Carolina, Avram, who are working with textbooks from the 20th century, and we're expected to be teaching kids 21st century skills, 21st century knowledge. And a lot of the classrooms in North Carolina don't even have textbooks, not to mention not even having a 1998 textbook. They have no textbook. I had a friend this morning who posted on Facebook a photograph of termites eating the textbooks at his school in Charlotte. So that's happening. We have 7,500 fewer teacher assistants than we had just a few years ago, so we're marching in the streets this coming Wednesday to restore those teacher assistants. We've lost positions in this state. Our school supply money has been taken away. We don't have the ratio of counselors and psychologists that are the industry standard, much less what we had again back in 2008, 2009. So it's really support services and tools. Now, would we like to make more money? Absolutely. Would we like to at least keep pace with inflation? Absolutely. But North Carolina teachers are currently making about 6% less. 6% less, if you look at it on adjusted for inflation across the board, we're 6% less of where we were around 2007, 2008.
In actual dollars.
In actual dollars, inflation
so while the cost of health care has gone through the roof and you've had to pay more for that.
Well, that actually, if you bring up health care, Avram, then that's a whole nother set. That's a whole nother set of issues right there, because it used to be if you were you were a single teacher, for example, or your spouse was on another employer's health care plan, North Carolina teachers did not have any out-of-pocket costs as an individual for their premiums. That's changed, so all individual teachers have to pay something. And if you're in a situation where you have to have a spouse and or your family, that number has gone up around, the last several years, that number has gone up $10,000 a year. So forget the stagnant wages. Healthcare costs, out-of-pocket premium costs, deductible costs for North Carolina teachers, those costs have skyrocketed. The deductibles are higher than they were. The co-pays are not as substantial. Now, North Carolina teachers aren't special. We are in the same boat as every other North Carolinian, every other American. All of our healthcare costs have gone up. So apples to apples, we're all in that same boat of misery together.
I don't understand how teachers survive and how the school system is surviving given what you're telling me, and I don't understand how a public official, an elected public official, can allow that to happen. But let me to make things worse from my perspective, North Carolina public employees are not allowed to engage in collective bargaining. There's no teachers union in North Carolina. How can you address this? How can we address this this issue? And how is it? I mean, it was a similar situation in West Virginia and Arizona.
Right.
How are teachers organizing? And is North Carolina are North Carolina teachers becoming organized and prepared to do the same thing that the teachers did in West Virginia and Arizona and Colorado?
I think each state is different. I think the dynamics in each state are different, and I think the prevailing winds or counter winds, the headwinds that teachers groups face in every state is a little bit different. You asked how are we organizing in North Carolina, and certainly the Parent Association, the North Carolina Association of Educators, which I've been a proud member of for 22 years. NCAE has certainly taken the lead in stimulating this event. What we've taken, we have historically had at the beginning of a session a lobby day, and you might see 100 teachers, 200 teachers come to the Capitol to lobby into their elected officials. But because of what was going on nationally, our lobby day turned into an advocacy day. And then that advocacy day then started to morph. And you know, I think the sense with NCAE leadership, we've got an incredible leader in President Mark Jewell. We were really unsure of what to expect. I mean, you know, I had hard questions for Mark a few weeks ago, but in fairness to Mark, and if I was sitting in his seat, I wouldn't have had any good answers for my questions because we don't know. We don't know what the critical mass of energy is out there. We don't know what kind of headwinds we're facing. We don't know what level of the intensity level for teachers who have been maybe sitting on the fence, not organized before. So you ask, you know, how are we organizing? We're certainly using Facebook. So we're certainly using social media. We're certainly using Twitter. We've gotten excellent direction from the communications team at NCAE. But I'd like to highlight another group that I think this is one of these type of movements, because I teach the civil rights movement. I teach social movements in American history. And it's never really the case that it's one leader or one group of people or just one column. You have multiple columns and multiple leaders, and hopefully what happens is they start to converge and they find common ground and they find a common message, and I think we can see that happening in North Carolina. So I'd like to highlight Brian Proffitt, who is the head of the Durham Association of Educators, and Brian is just one of the most dynamic, incredible organizers that North Carolina has. Brian and his teachers took the lead and asking for a leave day for the 16th before anybody else, and they were able to basically force the Durham County school system to shut down. And then that opened the door for Chapel Hill City to follow their lead. And then a couple Fridays ago, Wake went. And I thought, okay, or no, excuse me, no, Wake didn't go, but Charlotte went.
I didn't know any of this was happening. That's
okay, that my phone, I mean, you heard when I walked into the studio today, you heard my messenger ping going off. My messenger ping has, you know, I've got to keep it muted between 8 o'clock and 3 o'clock, but my messenger ping and my watch is right now vibrating as we speak because the dominoes that have fallen. So from Durham to Chapel Hill City to Charlotte Mech, and you know, somewhere in there Wake went, and then Asheville City went, and then Nash went, and then Pitt went, and then Iredell Statesville. Just a few days ago, you know, we thought it was a big deal that there was 19. This morning, I think we're up to 36 systems. About 64%.
I've read nothing of this in the newspaper, nothing on public radio, nothing.
It's happened. First of all, it's totally unexpected.
Yeah.
I didn't expect it. As optimistic as I wanted to be, I did not expect this to happen. So I think one of the reasons for the lack of coverage is it was unexpected. It's happened so quickly. This isn't on a lot of people's beats, especially if, you know, North Carolina is the most, this is an interesting little piece of trivia. We're the most linguistically diverse state in the country. I think that's an interesting piece of, that's a cultural and sociological piece of data that I think is important for us to understand the complexities of politics in the state. And something else that most people do know, if they think about it for a little bit, there are fewer miles between Raleigh, North Carolina and New York City than there are miles between Murphy and Mattino. So, you know, and so the Piedmont, the Triangle, and the Triad tends to dominate the state. It tends to also dominate the coverage of the state. So if you're in the far west and you're outside of those major media markets, a lot of times you're not hearing it. You'd be hearing it if you were reading the News and Observer every day. You'd be reading about it if you were reading the Charlotte Observer or the Greensboro News and Record every day. But, you know, the Asheville Citizen, and I'm not knocking the Asheville Citizen, and I'm not knocking the Wilmington Star, but, you know, these type of movements have tended to be more Piedmont, Triangle, Triad oriented than they have been either the mountains or the sandhills oriented.
You'd think that public radio would pick it up, and maybe they have. I almost never remember.
I don't know where public radio is.
Well, this is all fascinating, and it's heartening to hear that it's going on. And where do you see it going? Or let me make that note too. Where do you see it going, and where do you hope it goes?
Okay, that's another great question. So there are a group of us, and somewhere between 10 and 15 activist teachers across the state, and there is currently a website, Red for Ed NC, and with the 4 being the number 4, redforednc.org, and right now it has been a website for a activist organization, but it will be rebranded, it will be relaunched this coming Wednesday. And so what a group of us are hoping to do on Wednesday is to drive people to that particular website and formulate next steps, knowing that Wednesday is a moment, and that's all. It's a big moment, and it's one of the biggest moments in North Carolina public school history. But it is only that. It's only a moment. And if we cannot, what our task before us is we've got to take the energy that will be out on display on Wednesday, and we've got to convert that energy to efforts and results at the ballot box. Because if we don't connect that energy with efforts at the polling sites, I'm afraid that most of our energies will have been misspent. I'm not laboring, I don't think any of us are laboring under the delusion that all of a sudden the General Assembly are going to look out the windows of their offices on Wednesday afternoon at the 10 to 15,000 or more teachers that are out there on Halifax Mall and suddenly have a change of heart and change policies and philosophies that they've held on to most of their professional political lives. So we will be working together, and the leadership of this organization freely admits that we are not sure what the next steps are. We know one thing, that we have got to do more to incorporate rural North Carolina, that we've got to do more to incorporate the far west, we've got to do more to incorporate the far east. We have to do more to incorporate teachers who are more politically conservative than your typical quote-unquote teacher activist. We have got to meet them where they are. We can't be strident in our attitudes and our rhetoric. We have got to find common ground. But I think, I'll give you one anecdote, and this has been the most heartening anecdote that I've experienced, not just in the past couple of weeks, but in 22 years of doing public education advocacy. I've got a former student at Franklin High School. Her name is Caitlin McLean McMahon. And Kate, again, a former student of mine, she's been teaching for 7 years at Franklin High School, and she is an outstanding science teacher. Kate has seen in our department, she has seen the science staff go from 8 teachers to 7 teachers to 6 teachers. She has seen the electives at our high school go from 7 electives down to 1 elective. Now, we're supposed to be creating 21st century learners, students, and if we're chopping science electives and there's a collective consensus cry that we've got to have science, that STEM classes are really the cutting edge of where American education needs to go, and we're chopping that locally. So Kate, on her own, she's a member of NCAE, but basically on her own, without any guidance from me, she starts to organize the science department. So on Wednesday, the whole science department of Franklin High School will be down in Raleigh. Our STEM coordinator will be down in Raleigh. We've got a couple of mothers in Franklin who have been doing some amazing organizing. We had a meeting at the Lazy Hiker last Tuesday. We had about 40 people in attendance, teachers and parents. We've got another meeting coming up this coming Thursday, and this is mostly to work on local budget issues, which is a whole nother kettle of fish. But I've seen interest to take on the county commissioners and I would say their lack of appropriate funding at the local level. I've seen critical mass form there like I've never seen form before.
So this seems to me an issue that goes far beyond just the teachers themselves in the public school system. It seems like everybody has a stake in this. It seems like parents of children throughout the state, and especially parents of low-income communities who are looking to better themselves and create opportunities for their children. They want to have a strong public school system, and it's been on the decline for the last decade. Have you been coordinating? Or I should say, have you felt any support from, for instance, the NAACP and the Moral Monday movement? It seems like a natural alliance that could be forged there that could bring far more than 15,000 people to one of these marches. We had about 100,000 people show up at the HKNJ march. So is there anything happening on that level?
I can certainly tell you that Mark Jewell does a lot of work with the NAACP. That's at the state level leadership. In terms of local or regional, I'm not aware of any coordinated activity. I know that there are a lot of teachers such as myself and some other teachers over in Macon County who are, in addition to being NCAE members, are also NAACP members. It's difficult. We all have. I think there's a couple of barriers to overcome there. First of all, we have different sets of priorities, and so coming together on a common set of priorities is difficult. And you need strong leaders to be able to do that. But not just strong leaders. You need followers who are willing to maybe not have their pet issue be the #1 issue, or at least maybe not their pet issue for that particular moment, or to find some sort of, again, common ground. And there's no getting around the fact that we are a highly polarized tribal society in 2018. So when you bring up, say, the Moral Monday movement or the NAACP, that there are signal connotations that come with that are going to immediately, for better or worse, they're going to be off-putting to certain constituencies. Constituencies that maybe if the Moral Monday movement or the NAACP wasn't in the room, that you might be able to bring more teachers on board. And of course, this is nothing new. This is something that's plagued the progressive movement since the late '60s. We are very good at creating our own silos, and I thought a lot about this, and so you can decide later if you want to edit this out or not. We don't have, the progressive movement in the United States does not have the transcendent issues that force people together of that the cultural right in this country does. And we don't have the race issue. We don't have xenophobia. So if you look at the so-called evangelical movement that has supported Donald Trump, Well, it's very clear, given Donald Trump's moral shortcomings, which are vast and empirical, that a huge part of the evangelical movement has hung in there with him. So it must be something besides Donald Trump's cleavage to the morals that are laid out in the Gospels that are leading evangelicals to stay with him. And my suggestion would be that it's a dysfunctional nationalism that has formed that alliance. So back to the progressive side of the equation, we don't have anything really to kind of hold us together other than to say, well, we're not that. And you know, for better or worse, that's where we're, and to define yourself in a negative fashion is never sustainable, and it's never the most.
But being pro-education is a positive value that I think does bind all of the progressive movement together. And in fact, the Moral Monday movement is very pro-public education. And one of the platforms, and I don't know if you're that familiar with the Moral Monday movement, but generally each Moral Monday demonstration focuses on one issue. It may be public education, it might be the environment another time, it might be labor rights another time, and it might be voting rights another time, women's rights another time. You know, so I don't see it as a far stretch at all.
It shouldn't be, but there is an urban-rural divide in this country that is also strongly correlated along racial lines. But certainly you can go all the way back and you can look at the United States in the 1920s and look at the United States from the 1920s up to the present day, and there's a rural-urban divide. And so when you hear Moral Monday or you hear NAACP and you're rural, then the defense mechanisms, the shields, the reticence starts to emerge, unfortunately. There's no doubt that there's rhetorically there's common ground. We should be working together, and I'd certainly, you know, if somebody wants to do it, whether it's statewide or whether it's here in Western North Carolina, I'll take any ally, any other support group I can possibly get, and the group of people that I work with, I would certainly do everything in my power to convince them to turn around and support their current agenda. I mean, I think that that's essential. I think all the different elements of the progressive movement have to support each other if we're going to be successful.
Sure, but I think you will find an ally in the Moral Monday movement, and it's a vast, very powerful coalition of groups. And I personally will advocate for that. I happen to be a vice president of the Jackson County branch of the NAACP, and I can tell you that public education is right at the top of the agenda for everybody, because we get nowhere without a good public education system. I mean, ultimately it's not good for any sector of the society. I mean, if you want a good, well-educated workforce, and you're an industrialist, you want a good public education system.
I agree. I'm not going to say his name yet, but one of the top employers in Franklin, the rumor is that he's going to come out and support us on the local fight. Now, if that really happens, that will be a huge deal, because there certainly are economic interests afoot. But I don't really know where we are. I like to think I'm somewhat of an astute student on macro forces in the United States. I confine my amateur status to that playing field. Let me give you a statistic that I find disturbing, or alarming, or at least should give us a moment of pause. What percent of students in North Carolina, traditional, not charters, what percent of students in North Carolina traditional schools are white? And the answer, what would you guess? Any guess?
What percent?
What percent in a North Carolina traditional public school are white? What percent would you guess?
Of the students?
Of the current students, yeah.
Of the
student
students,
body.
what percentage are white? It would have to be, I don't know, 70%?
My guess would have been 60, 65.
Yeah.
The answer is 49.5. Okay, so let's take a look at that right there. There has been, since busing, integration, and several other factors happened in the 70s and 80s. There has been an undeniable middle class flight, which is mostly white, from public schools. And so what we're left with, I think, in North Carolina public schools, and this is speaking in broad generalities, and a lot of these broad generalizations don't apply to, say, Western North Carolina as well as they might other parts of the state. But what is left in North Carolina schools, let's take that 49.5% of the school population, current school population, is white. My guess is half of those kids are close to the poverty line, and the other half are somewhere above it. So, and then on the other side of that line is the children of color. What percent of them are close to the poverty line? Probably a lot more than half of those kids. So if you're a lawmaker and you've got a nice gerrymandered state, then the signals that you're getting from your various constituencies are public schools really don't matter. They are maybe something to fund at a subsistence level, but not to fund them for excellence. You fund them to the point to where they don't revolt, to where they don't storm the barricades, but certainly there's not a focus on excellence that you would have seen maybe in the 60s and 70s and maybe the early 80s. There's just been and this, you're seeing this nationally. So as you have more and more students of privilege, white students moving to private schools, moving to enclaves of charter schools, being homeschooled, there's just less and less basic support, political support, which then translates into financial support for the traditional public school. So now here in Western North Carolina, I think the picture is a little bit better than that, and it's maybe some folks in Western North Carolina, we are heavily invested in our public schools. I think more so, I would say that the white population of Western North Carolina is more invested in its public schools than maybe in a lot of metropolitan areas of the state. We love our sports teams. We love football. We love basketball. We love band. We've got great AP programs in our Western North Carolina public schools. And I think you'll find some of the things down east. You also, I think, another outlier would be Chapel Hill City Schools, which has got heavy political and thus economic investment in their schools. Wake County, they have a thriving white middle class, and they've got a thriving public school system. Watauga County is another excellent example. Where you find universities, you find strong support for public schools. If you've got a university in your county, a university in your district, that's a great marker. So you can look at, say, Macon County's numbers, and you can compare us to Transylvania and Jackson and Watauga. Those other three counties have far more support. And what do they have that Macon County doesn't have? They've got a university. They've got Boone or Brevard or Western Carolina, and I think that makes a big difference. So maybe the answer to solve public education is build a university in every county, or I don't know. But without that type of critical support right there, that's it's tough to play the game.
That's a frightening picture.
It is. I mean, I'm absolutely. I am. Again, I've done this for 22 years, and I hope to teach at least for 4 more. I think that we're either somewhat past the crossroads of no return, and I don't think we can know that yet, or we're at the crossroads. And so, I think that the outcome of the energy that's generated this coming Wednesday is a big deal. I think that the results of, if we could break the supermajority, I mean, that's why I'm wearing a hat here. It's not that...
Which says, make the General Assembly great again.
That's right, and you can go get your own on Zazzle for about $30. But, there are we've got some Republicans in the House that have been very supportive, but the Republican majority in the Senate has not just not been supportive, they've just been openly hostile, I would say. Now, they will point to instantiations where they have raised teacher pay, and you can find some places on the collective teacher body that aren't bruised and have really some nice makeup on them. But if you look at the whole body, we're in tough shape. And the Senate has just took away longevity pay. They've taken away career status starting in 2021. They won't cover retiree health benefits anymore. We had a representative down in Union County, now he's not in the Senate, who just yesterday penned an editorial calling those of us who were going to be protesting and advocating for our students on Wednesday, he called us thugs. So I would hope that this coming November we can break the supermajority. If we can break the supermajority, then that forces negotiation. So, you know, you will at least have to, the General Assembly will have to at least listen to the governor. And the governor will have to listen to both the House and the Senate.
But now, I mean, look at what happened in West Virginia and Kentucky, I believe, and Arizona. Even though they have solid Republican control over both houses and the governors, when the teachers went on strike, they won.
Well, first, okay, I got to Kentucky. I don't think Kentucky. First of all, you look at where they walked out in Kentucky. If you look at a heat map of where they walked out in Kentucky, it's the suburbs. So again, that in Kentucky, I think in a lot of ways is a lot like North Carolina. You've got one set of sensibilities in the suburbs and another set of sensibilities and concerns in the rural area. West Virginia, they absolutely won. Now, they won there. I think there's two reasons that they quote-unquote won in West Virginia. One was that the superintendents, all the superintendents of West Virginia had their teachers back. There was no strike. Okay, the superintendents closed down the schools.
Okay.
Okay, so superintendents
the same impact as a strike.
Absolutely,
though.
Absolutely. Yeah. But the words, I'm forced to choose my words carefully because strike's illegal in North Carolina.
As it was in West Virginia.
So that's why I wanted to strike.
Okay.
So I think there's two reasons that they won in West Virginia. One was, again, the superintendents had the teachers back and the backs, and I think that the other issue was West Virginia was in just god-awful shape. If you look at the top 2 or 3 states that have been most devastated by the lack of funding, the post-2008-2009 recession funding, West Virginia and Oklahoma. Oklahoma's at the top. They're absolutely the worst off. 20% of Oklahoma schools operate on a 4-day week. Okay, and if you saw the pictures of their class, I mean, their physical plant in Oklahoma's god awful. So, because they were way worse off, that created the outrage was so much more disseminated and intense. Which then, there was absolutely no safe corner for the West Virginia legislature and the Oklahoma legislature to run to.
And how is that different in North Carolina?
Okay, and I think that's a really important point. We are, if you look at where we're funded relative to 2008, 2009, the whole ball of wax is somewhere between 6%, 9%, 12% under of where we were funded in 2008, depending on which rubric, which measuring stick you want to use. So what I believe has gone on, and I think I can make a good, empirical case and bore all of your listeners to death with it, is that the General Assembly of North Carolina has been quite astute as to what they have cut and what they have funded. I think they have calibrated it so carefully that they know that they have to throw just a certain amount of scraps, certain number of scraps over the wall to keep the critical mass of revolt from occurring. But I think they have slightly undercalibrated that. Otherwise, you wouldn't see 15,000 people. So, but we weren't the first state to go. We weren't the second. We weren't third. So, and if you look at the chart of, and I don't know if I brought the right one with me here or not, but if you look at, and this is not the one I really wanted, but I can send it to you. Maybe then you can splice it in. If you look at this chart that the nonpartisan Center for Budget Priorities put together, look at where relative funding is to in inflation-adjusted dollars to 2008, it almost gives you, it's almost a perfect correlation in the states that went on strike and the order in which they went on strike. So based on that one chart, you could just about predict, okay, now it's our turn. It's North Carolina's turn. So we're not as bad off as West Virginia and Oklahoma and Arizona, but we are, I would say, one of the 10th or 12th worst off. And,
well, and given the momentum created by the other states, I think that, you know, there's, to me, that means that there's something happening.
There's no doubt.
That nationwide. In Arizona, again, a Republican legislature, Republican governor saying, no, we can't afford to give you anything, and they end up completely caving in, giving them a 20% raise, which they probably deserve every bit of.
Right.
Given the increased cost of health care and everything else that's going on that teachers are dealing with. Certainly, the teachers in this state are feeling that pressure every bit as much as the teachers in Arizona will feel.
Where the one statistic which really, I think, differentiates, and again, I'll see if I can find it for you. It's a study that just came out about 2 weeks ago. The relative pay for a North Carolina teacher relative to other college graduates. And if you look at that disparity, the disparity between teacher and other and those other people with four-year degrees and what they're making, the disparity in North Carolina might be the greatest in this state than it is in any other state. So that right there, that particular gap, is one of the reasons that we're having a hard time filling positions. It's one of the reasons that Charlotte-Mecklenburg this past school year, when they started with over 1,000 teaching positions unfilled. So we've got other opportunities in North Carolina. You know, if you've got a four-year degree, opportunities that you might not have in Oklahoma, or opportunities you might not have in West Virginia. But if you've got a four-year degree, you can, you know, rub two brain cells together, you can make a decent living doing a lot of other. I mean, I've got a nephew who's, you know, a high school graduate, and he's, you know, started off at $17 an hour a couple weeks ago, working here in Silva for UPS.
Sure, but that's just one part of the equation, it seems to me. I mean, the other end of it is the absolute need for a high-quality education by the population of North Carolina, and we're feeling, the people are feeling the squeeze, you know, and you know the unions of the labor unions of the United States of America have been in decline since the Reagan administration, and since he fired the air traffic controllers, you know.
Patco was a big moment.
And yeah, and so at one time, something like I think 35 or 40% of the labor force was unionized in this country. Now it's down to 10 or 11%. You know, and I think that what is happening, the dynamics, I believe historically, of what is happening is that, you know, if labor unions never came into existence, originally labor unions were illegal in the United States of America. We had to fight for them. People had to
die for them.
And die for them. They literally got shot and clubbed and thrown in jail for attempting to organize labor unions. And if it wasn't for labor unions, we'd still have child labor in the United States. People would be working for 25 cents a day. You know, people wouldn't be able to buy. Health insurance would be a dream. It wouldn't even be, you know, something achievable by, you know, by anybody outside of the 1%, and so many other things. You know, buying a house would just be out of the question for so many people. We wouldn't have a middle class in this country if it wasn't for labor unions. And what seems to be happening historically, now we're reaching this bottom. People have forgotten the role that labor unions played in creating this standard of living for people. And we're beginning to reach that point again, where people don't see hope for the future. They don't see how their children are going to get a college education without going into debt that nobody is willing to acquire.
Right.
You know, and so a state like North Carolina, which it's illegal for public employees to form a labor union and do collective bargaining. I don't. It seems inevitable to me that that's going to be challenged. People are not going to give up the hope of living a middle class standard in the United States of America without some type of fight. and I see this. I mean, what's happening with the teachers in red states. This is all happening in red, solid red states, and people are beginning to observe. Wow. They got together and organized and won.
Right.
They won. In Arizona, 20% rate increase against a governor and a state legislature that was adamant that they couldn't afford to pay teachers more. I see that this is hopefully going to happen in North Carolina as well and lead to collective bargaining for all state employees. And a standard of living that's going to increase for all North Carolinians potentially, but it won't happen if people don't stand up and support the teachers.
Well, they have to support their teachers. They have to support themselves. I think the difficult conversation to have is with teachers and other people who have been for some time voting against their economic interest. And so if you're going to the ballot box and you're making your decision for a candidate on the social issues and not the economic ones, maybe those things that are important to you on a social, cultural basis, those get taken care of, but your health care is not going to be any good. Your schools aren't going to be any good. Your roads won't be any good. Your air and water won't be any good. None of the things that impact your material existence will be worth a flip. Your spiritual side might be fed, but I think that's going to be a rather it's going to be a low calorie or no calorie meal that your soul is going to get to because how can you function if you're not educated or your children aren't educated? How can you function if your air is polluted and your water is polluted or you just don't have water? Those other. I mean, both elements I think are important to a human being, and they both have got to be taken care of. But there's been for too long, I think far too many voters have put in all their chips on those social issues, and they're going to have to start taking part of that chip stack and put it on things like air, water, workplace justice, and educational justice, healthcare justice. Absolutely.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit about something.
Okay, absolutely. I love that.
I agree with you totally that it's important that everybody participate in the voting process, and to look at the issues. Don't look at it as a football game where you're just rooting for your team over the other team. Look at it for the issues involved and who stands for what, and vote your interests when you go to the polls. Really your interests, your economic interests.
Absolutely.
But even if your candidate doesn't get elected, even if your party doesn't get elected, that doesn't mean that the game is over. Because North Carolina right now is so very badly gerrymandered that it is possible that the Democrats will prevent a veto-proof majority in the House and the Senate, but they still won't win the majority and gain control of the state legislature.
Right.
That doesn't mean that we stop fighting, and not just at the ballot box, but it means that we still have to apply pressure to the Republican state legislature, even if they maintain a supermajority.
Oh, I mean, I don't know where you thought the disagreement was, because I totally agree with everything that you say.
Well, I'm just saying that we can win even under those circumstances. You know, that's what happened in Arizona. That's what happened in West Virginia. And let me tell you, historically, that is what happened over and over again in the United States of America. When women gained the right to vote, it wasn't only a majority, it was a unanimity of men who were in charge of every state legislature, and every member of Congress and the president were all men.
Right.
And women overcame that barrier to gain the right to vote. You know, and the same was true with labor unions. I mean, corporate interests were in control, have been in control of this country all along.
Right.
But when people get together and organize, it is more powerful than the money that is delivered into the pockets of corrupt politicians.
Absolutely.
And so we have the power. The people have the power. And it's a matter of believing that, and organizing, and getting out on the streets and demonstrating and lobbying and talking to state legislators. And when you do that, it scares the hell out of them.
Oh, it does. It does. And I'll go. I'm sorry. Did you finish?
No, I think I got my point.
Okay, but I mean, and I appreciate the enthusiasm, and I'm waiting for when the Avram Friedman for office buttons are going to be issued.
I've already done that 4 times.
Okay, so
yeah,
but. I agree with everything that you said, and I absolutely appreciate the enthusiasm and agree with you wholeheartly that the people united cannot be defeated.
Yeah.
But it's a question of getting them united.
Yes.
And I also, and to expand your point, not only do we need to keep banging on and lobbying and pestering those people who have philosophies that are antithetical to the progressive movements, not only do we go after them at the state level, we go after their surrogates at the county level. That's what I've been working on a lot the last several years. I am struck by the genius of the Koch brothers and Art Pope's operation in this state in 2010. They did not go after Washington, D.C. They went after the various state houses in a very strategic fashion. And I think we could take a page out of their playbook and hit county government, county commissioners. Because right now the county commissioners, I could tell you across the state, Republican county commissioners, they're feeling the squeeze. They've got the people in the room who are demanding the schools be built, demanding that they attract and recruit high-quality teachers and everything else. And the state continues to diminish and diminish and diminish and diminish the amount of money, while they keep increasing the unfounded mandates. So I think that's a point of leverage for us right there. And then one last thing. Not only do we, if we lose, do we have to keep on fighting, we have to keep on fighting if we win. This is one of the things I think the Democrats so often forget. Okay, yes, our guy got elected, and we really need to kick him in the rear end daily to make sure that those promises that were made on the campaign trail are truly upheld, because I'm sure you could go longer than I can on the number of unkept promises or philosophies that went off in some sort of dysfunctional neoliberal direction that we never wanted to see, and we were never told that that's what the plan was.
So true. So true. Yeah. Well, this is great. John, thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for coming on the show
My
today
pleasure.
And talking with me. And how can people help?
That's a great question.
As a parting shot, tell us which web pages we can come to visit.
Let's go. I'll double check it, but redforednc.org, and again, that being the number 4. That could be one. Going to ncae.org and seeing what we're doing there. I would recommend one blog I would highly recommend to you, to anybody interested in public education in North Carolina. Go Google Caffeinated Rage. Stu Egan is a English teacher in Forsyth County, And I've teased him several times that in his former life he must have been a white-collar criminal prosecutor. His command of the facts and then marshaling those to create an argument are fantastic. I would highly recommend Googling Chris Nordstrom, K-R-I-S Nordstrom. And go look, if you want to look at what's happened in North Carolina public education for the past 10 years, you are not going to find a better document than Chris Nordstrom's The Unraveling. If you go Google Chris Nordstrom, The Unraveling, there is a very succinct charts and graphs, all the numbers, exactly what the General Assembly has done to North Carolina public education since January of 2011, and it's one hell of a scary autopsy, but it's all right in there. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.